and they meet every Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the Collier Lounge of the Hamilton Residence Complex. And so all are welcome to participate. You can join us every week if you like, or when your midterms and papers allow you to. We're just interested to have your ideas. And we've got a great group this year, so we'd love to have more participation. As I mentioned this evening, I also wanted to mention that our library partners, Elizabeth Peterson and Barbara Jenkins, have put together an annotated bibliography for this evening's topic, and you could be interested in coming collectively. So if you're interested in other reading, definitely visit the Community Conversations website at the library. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Mike.
How you doing? My name is, for those of you that don't know who I work in housing. I'm a coordinator of conduct. And to my left here is Hilary Berkman. She is the student, one of the student advocates that works out of the Office of Student Advocacy at the EMU building. And then we have Lyllye, who works at the Office of Multicultural Advising Service, Academic Advice. Yes, I butchered that. I always mess that up. First of all, I'd like to welcome you tonight for our panel. There's a lot of things you could be doing on a Tuesday night, but you've come out here to hopefully engage in a conversation about reparations with us, okay? We're not the experts up here, okay? And some of you might have done some research on reparations. And what we're hoping that tonight is it's a discussion about reparations. Now, there's a whole list of stuff that I'm going to go over about what we hope the night entails. And then after that, I'm going to go briefly into a little bit of history about reparations, its study within this country. And then after that, I'm going to give it over to the two guests. And then we're hoping that after that you have questions or comments because, like I said, we're not the experts up here. We've just read a little bit and we kind of have an understanding of what's gone on. But I think true education and true learning comes from question and answer. So please feel free to ask us questions or to make statements, even challenge, because the way that I think that we learn is through challenging one another about our beliefs and what we think. So with that, I'm going to kind of go through my laundry list. Why the topic? The topic came about, I believe, last spring term or winter term when there was a community conversation on genocide and ethnocide. And basically what that talked about was how there have been cultures in this country and in other countries that basically other cultures haven't liked, and they've tried to wipe them off the face of the earth. As we had that conversation, one thing that came to my mind is that one of the original, well, I wouldn't say original because the earth has been around a lot longer than I have, but one of the things that really stuck in my mind is that as an African male, African-American male, African Americans or blacks were taken from Africa and brought over to this country and taken away from their culture, their way of life, and what they knew at that time, and brought over against their will, and then forced to learn a whole nother culture, a whole nother way of life. And to me, that was a form of ethnocide. That was a form of genocide, because they was taking away their very lives and what they had and what they knew, and then forced to learn another person's culture. So that's how this came about. Kevin and I started talking after that, and by no means did I ever think that I was going to be up here talking about this later. Actually, it's kind of nerve-wracking, but I think it's important that we do talk about this. The second reason why this topic is everybody probably knows about Dave Chappelle and his popularity, and then he kind of went off to Africa because they said that he needed some mental training, but not mental training, mental health issues. Did anybody see the episode about reparations? Okay, I'll admit, if you didn't see it, basically there's a newscast and Dave Chappelle's playing a white newscaster, and it's talking about how all the blacks finally got their reparations checks. Now, it's funny, and I think we're going to be talking about that topic with another community conversation about how that humor is used. But the issue I had was this. There was three reasons. One, the reparations was giving in the form of money, which that's good. Checks are good. Cash is good. But a lot of reparations and a lot of the discussion about reparations isn't just monetarily based. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Secondly, it perpetuated a huge stereotype that all blacks would do if they got these reparations checks was go out and spend it on everything. There's a scene where the reporter is interviewing an individual with a cool truck, the cigarette cool truck. And it's like, oh, so you're going to quit your job delivering cigarettes? And he says, no, I bought this truck of cigarettes with my money. And I thought that was it was funny, but it really got me thinking, is that the stereotypes that they have about blacks? And the last is that it's an inaccurate portrayal of the argument or the pursuit of reparations. It's not just about money, as stated before. The topics that I believe that need to be discussed come from a number of areas. One, historical. When we look at reparations from a historical point of view, it gives us the reasons why. Why are reparations important? Okay, and not just for monetary sake, but for psychological reasons, for personal reasons. From a social economic, the who is responsible, who should get it? You know, just because I'm a black male, does that mean that I get reparations? What if I can't trace my family roots back to Africa or slavery? The legal side of it, can it be done from a legal standpoint? That's a big discussion right now, and you find lawyers on both sides of the equation talking about, yes, reparations can be done, it's a lot of hard work, and then there's lawyers on the other side that say, this is not going to happen, it's impossible. From the political side, how can it be done? When you look at the way that reparations have come for the Japanese and for the Jewish and for the Native Americans also, there's been a political grassroots approach to it. Unfortunately, and this is one of the few opinions that I will say, from an African American point of view, we can't seem to get on the same page. And I'll bring up some instances from an article that I wrote. And finally, the psychological aspect of reparations. Reparations will not only affect the African American society, but it will affect the majority society. It will affect other cultures that live within this country. And it's just not about the blacks. The purpose of tonight, to explore the topics. Like I said, we're not the experts, and we're hoping that you guys have some insight too. To discuss on a personal level, I believe Lyllye's going to talk about her story and why her thoughts on reparations, but also on a global level, and look at it from, because reparations just isn't a topic that is discussed within this country. It's discussed in a number of other countries that have multiculturals too, like in Brazil and in South Africa. To identify who, if anyone, is responsible and how to move towards making reparations a possibility. If reparations are going to happen, somebody's going to have to be like, hey, we did this. And that's a difficult conversation to have. If you can imagine somebody who you don't know walks up to you and says, you owe me $20. I don't know you. Why do I owe you $20? Well, because your brother, sister's cousin did something to me. That's personal. What are the positive and negative consequences, excuse me, back to my page, about the current debate about reparations? As stated, there's a lot of individuals that are on opposite sides of it, black and white. What this isn't about, hopefully this isn't, we're not going to argue. And that's the biggest thing when we talk about personal topics. Arguments can ensue. People can get very emotional and sometimes lose the ability to look rationally at a topic because it's so personal, because it hits close to home. Reparations are one of those topics because it is personal, whether you're black or white. If you're black and you believe reparations should happen, then you believe reparations should happen. If you're the majority and you believe reparations shouldn't happen, then you're going to believe reparations shouldn't happen. And then you have everybody else under the bell-shaped curve. Reparations are controversial because it's basically saying you owe me. Reparations are a story of inequality and injustice for some, and guilt and anger for others. And it's also a taboo subject, and this is the second opinion that I'll be saying, is that I think in the culture there's still a fear of the black man or the black woman. And because of that, this topic is not brought up. But when you look at culture and you look at one of the most influential cultures that have happened throughout the years, it has been the hip-hop culture. And the hip-hop culture has come from the inner cities, and the predominance of the individuals that live in the inner cities are black. What we hope tonight can be, one, educational, not only for the individuals that are coming, but also for the individuals that are up here, because, as stated, we are not the experts. We hope that it's thought-provoking. We hope that when you leave from here, that something just kind of rattles around in the head. You don't have to go out and do a 20-page thesis on reparations and why it shouldn't or shouldn't happen. There's been people that have done that. But we hope that it is thought-provoking. We hope to have a critical analysis of it. Critical meaning that we're going to have a discussion that examines the facts and try to keep emotion as contained as possible. We hope that it's inspiring. We're not here to provoke guilt or it's your fault or anything like that. That's not the purpose of this. And we hope that this tonight is open for everyone here, not just the individuals that believe that reparations should happen. For individuals that believe that reparations shouldn't happen, you have a voice here also, because it's not just a one-sided thing. So that's my little spiel off that. I do thank you for coming tonight, and we hope that this is an open environment for all. So I'm going to continue talking before my two colleagues do, and there's a couple of things I want to put out. One, as stated, reparations have been a topic of discussion basically since the end of the Civil War. There's a wonderful book that I'm still reading. Kevin Hatfield gave this to me, but it's basically about Callie House. Okay, anybody know who Callie House is, by chance? Okay, Callie House was an ex-slave. She was uneducated. She had no formal training or no formal education. But she was the first individual that talked about reparations for slaves. And the manner in which she talked about having the slaves being repaid for their work was off the taxes from the cotton that was already picked, if I remember right. Meaning that these taxes were already collected. It wasn't like they was building another fund to pay the slaves out of. It would come off the taxes. Nobody would be losing any profit from the cotton. Nobody would be losing any money. It was basically off the taxes. Well, nobody went for that. Okay, but during that time, during the Reconstruction era after World War II, there was a lot of activity, a lot of activism with the former slaves, because now that they're free, they believed, I think anybody would believe, that now that they're free, they should have the same rights and the same abilities as the individuals that enslaved them to begin with. So they wanted to have their schooling. They wanted to have their jobs. They wanted to be able to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, just like anybody else would want that. Well, it was promised to them by President Jackson, I believe. And that's where, if you're familiar with Spike Lee, and he has a production company called 40 Acres and a Mule. That's where it originally came from. They set aside an island in South Carolina that was for freed slaves. And they was saying, you get 40 acres, and President Jackson said, and the army will loan you mules so you can till the land, so you can make a way of life. And they basically had 400,000 acres of land being worked by the slaves. So if you do a quick little math, that was roughly, what's that, 10,000 slaves that was working 40 acres. So there was a lot of slaves or former slaves working this land. Well, the next president that came through decided that he was going to pardon all the slave owners and discontinued that program. So it put a lot of free slaves out. Then they had to find their way. During that time also, there was individuals coming down from the north that was wanting to educate the slaves, black and white, and they wanted to have their lives be better. But due to the racism, due to the laws, that was, even though they were free, they were still being segregated. Now, if you go into so that takes us up into the 1900s, where there were still movements towards reparations, but it just wasn't as vocal because they was dealing with individuals such as the Ku Klux Klan. And it wasn't until roughly the 50s where the civil rights started picking up speed is when reparations started getting another audience. There was a book, I believe, called the Black Manifesto, and actually that was much later, that came about, that basically talked about how the government, the white churches, and the synagogues needed to pay money towards this overarching organization. I can give you the name of that after this. They needed to pay money to this organization to pay for slavery. And it was actually the individual that wrote it, he went to a church in New York, and the individuals in the congregation and the pastor didn't know that this individual was going to do it. And so he goes up into the pulpit and starts talking about how these reparations need to be made. The congregation was stunned, just to say the least, because they're thinking, oh, we're going to hear a sermon. Oh, wait, they're talking about this needs to be paid back. And that found some mixed reviews. There was some individuals that was like, yes, we need to do this. And there was individuals like, whoa, stud, slow down. That's not cool. But it did pick up some speed. And eventually, money did start coming into the organization. Unfortunately, with that, though, enterprising men, and particularly in this case, enterprising black men, took the money. And it never really gained any speed. And it really caused the organization to have to look at what they was doing, and they shut it down. Now, the civil rights movement really took effect in the 60s and into the 70s, and during that time, the Black Panthers and a number of organizations really took hold of the reparations argument, but it was more along the lines of a financial type of action. But they was also looking as a means of a political type of discussion. If we get our reparations, then we can get some say in politics. We get some say in politics, then that'll help our plight overall. That was very strong during the civil rights movement. But once affirmative action came about, that kind of went the way of the dodo too, because now all of a sudden everybody is on an equal playing field. In the 80s, reparations started up again. And it started up from a number of intellectuals this time. There was a law professor in Yale and a law professor in Harvard that was going back and forth. One was saying reparations are needed. This is the way we go about it. And that's the Yale professor. The Harvard professor saying it's impossible. It will never happen because you would have to, one, change the political climate. You would have to change the legal climate, and you would have to change the economic climate, and that's not going to happen. So that's through the 80s. In the 90s, once again, there was a resurgence, but this time it was from a legal standpoint. People suing the government, people suing organizations, and I'm going to read this paragraph here because it's now in the 2000s, and these arguments are still going. I don't know if there's ever going to be a solution to this. I don't know if one day the government says, slavery was wrong. If it does, if the government ever does say that, then I think it would be a very interesting day, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that say, about time, somebody should have said something. But there are going to be a lot of other people going, whoa, this opens up a whole new can of worms, now what do we do? So I'm just going to read this paragraph because this is the most recent legal aspect of it. And then from that, I know I'm kind of leaving it hanging just a little bit because I want to spark some questions and discussion. So I'm leaving it hanging just a little bit. I'm going to read this, a couple of paragraphs to kind of say where they're at now. And then after that, I'll turn it over to whichever wants to go next. Okay. This is out of the book, Making Whole What Has Been Smashed on Reparations Politics. It was written by John Torpey, Torpey, by Harvard University Press, 2006. 40 Acres, The Case of Reparations for Black Americans. On Tuesday, March 26, 2002, a young black lawyer named Dia Driea, Farmer Pellman, filed suit in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York against Fleet Boston Financial Corporation, Aetna Insurance, and a railroad company named CSX Corporation, the respective predecessors in up to 1,000 corporate John Does, that, like the named companies, have profited from American slavery. The suit sought damages and compensation for 35 million descendants of African slaves, although the plaintiffs asserted that any award would not go towards the individuals but toward a fund to improve the health, education, and housing opportunities for blacks generally. According to Roger Wareham, one of the several lawyers who prepared the legal action, this is not about individuals receiving checks in their mailbox. The suit, actually one of 3 suits seeking redress for slavery-related wrongs that were filed that day, reflect a recent upsurge of efforts to pursue reparations for blacks in the United States. So that's the most recent case that we can come up with about reparations actions that are happening now. So.
tell you, I appreciate Mike and his background because I want you to know I did absolutely no research. I read no papers. I'm coming at you straight from the heart and from my own opinion. Uh, and so maybe I should give you a little history. My parents were from Shreveport, Louisiana. My father was born in 1893, and he was born to a freed slave. And if you think about it, I'm one generation removed from slavery. My father's mother, along with her cousin, bought property in rural Shreveport. And at some point, Richfield Oil Company came and drilled wells on their properties. I was there in 1977 with my parents, and I counted 20 oil wells pumping. My grandmother was paid $1 per well a year rent. So each year she got $20, and each year they got millions of dollars of crude oil. Those wells are still pumping. We have realized not one penny for my grandmother's purchase, and even though her cousin sold her portion of the land, my grandmother neither sold her land nor her mineral rights. But because she was an ex-slave and an uneducated black woman, she was exploited to the point that though she didn't die a pauper, she certainly died poorer than what she should have. And so when people speak to me of reparation, yes, I agree that in some way, shape, form, and fashion, there should be some process in this country for reparation to African Americans. And yes, it will open up Pandora's box, because I can sit here and tell you I'm one generation removed from slavery, but I can't prove it to you, because there is not a paper anywhere that we can find that has my grandma's name on it. And on my mother's side of the family, unfortunately, the only name change from generation to generation to generation was first names, because the surname came from the plantation owners and their friends and their other family. So my mother's father was the plantation owner, and she knew him and she knew his name, but of course he wasn't my grandfather. And it wasn't because biologically he did not produce my mom. It was because he was white and my grandma was black and had no say-so over whether she would mate with him and have children. When he died, though, his wife allowed my grandma to bring her children into the house during the wake, and they sat with him, and they sat in the back at the funeral and was able to say goodbye to their father. But of course, none of that is in writing. I can't prove it. And that's the sad part for a lot of descendants of African who were brought here as slaves in America. There's no paper trail. So I can take you back to my grandmother on my father's side. I can take you to my grandfather on my father's side and no further. I can take you to my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side, but I can't take you to any of the grandfathers on my mother's side, because that was robbed from me. I had no say in it. He was white. He wasn't going to own us to society. If he owned us, that meant that he owed us something. And I know that you've all been through your history classes, and you know that as an African slave, you had no right to say yay or nay. You just existed and did. I wished I had known my grandmothers. my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. They had long lives. My older siblings knew my great-great-grandma and my grandma on my mother's side. I was unfortunate they were gone before I got here, but I wished I had known them because they had to have been strong black women with no man to protect them. They survived, and they birthed children, and their children birthed children, and one of those children birthed me. My father, on the other hand, was raised by his mother, but his father was black. Unfortunately, as I was saying earlier, he had a very close white patron who took him into Arkansas to buy land, and they bought the land. But when it was found by the Klan that the land was bought for a black man, my grandfather never made it back to Shreveport, Louisiana. He was murdered. So I was robbed of that grandfather only because he was black, and he had the audacity to think that he could be a landowner in Little Rock, Arkansas. He did have the presence of mind to send his deeds in the mail to his wife, and my grandma gave them to my father, who brought them to Oregon with him in the 40s. And he made friends with a lot of judges and lawyers in Oregon. You'd love my dad. He was a storyteller, and he could sit for hours and talk and talk and talk and talk. And he'd go sit in the park blocks, and the lawyers and judges would come out of the courthouse for lunch, and they'd sit and talk and talk and talk and talk. And when my parents were being sued for some asinine reason, all the judges had to excuse themselves because they knew my father. They had to bring a judge from out of town to set the case. And of course, my father was found innocent. But he was. But he came to trust, and he gave his deeds to an attorney here in Eugene, and we never saw the deeds again. Of course, that attorney died a very rich man, but my father would never confront him about it because he was white. And my father came to Oregon in the first place because he had dared to stand up to himself for from a white man in Louisiana, and struck him, and he had to leave. He had to leave in order to preserve his life. My father came here, and he kicked lumber. That's what he called it. He worked at J.P. O'Neill Lumber Company until he retired. Never made more than $2 an hour. Can you imagine working for $2 an hour with 11 children to feed? Now, I am more than certain that there were people working for Mr. O'Neill who had not been there as long as my father and made much more money than he did. Even in the 60s, that was a little money. But he had no choice. He was uneducated. He was pulled out of school in the first grade. He never did return to school, even though he taught himself to read. He had no choice. That was the work that he could do, and he had a family to take care of. Do I believe in reparation? Yes. And I believe in it with a passion. Where would it come from? I don't know. Who owes it? I don't know. Who should receive it? I don't know. Because the first thing you would say is, prove to me that you have been harmed because of slavery. Show me your line. Connect yourself, and I can't do that. Unfortunately, for us, we don't have membership rolls. Native Americans are the only Americans who have to prove who they are in order to gain benefits by having a number on a roll. My number isn't even on the roll of the Blackfoot Indians, even though my great-grandmother on my father's side was Blackfoot. Nor will you find our name on the Cherokee or Chippewa rolls, even though my grandmother on my mother's side was Chippewa Cherokee. It was like we were a lost people. We didn't belong anywhere. We weren't here by choice, but we had nowhere to go. And nobody really wanted to claim us. But outside of all of that, outside of the atrocities of slavery, outside of the marginalization, not being able to be educated, being threatened with death if you were caught with a book trying to read. Outside of all of that, the beatings, because your body was ill and you couldn't get up and go to work, or you couldn't work fast enough to please the overseer on the plantation you worked at. Outside of all of that, outside of the rape and the violence against black women and girls, outside of all of that, I look at the fact that in spite of everything that we contributed to this country, we are still marginalized. We are still kept outside of the mainstream. If you look at the leadership of our country, you can almost count on two hands those who look like me, who sit in high political seats. If you look at the business world in our country and look in the offices of the EEOs or CEOs, it's only a handful who look like me. And then if you look at mid-management, the handful might double. If you look down at the bottom of the rung, that's where you'll find most of the people that look like me. Yes, I believe in reparation. I believe in reparation because I am who I am, because it is who society has created me to be. And in spite of what our general society thought I was or could ever be, I achieved. Now, would I benefit from reparation? No. I'm here. I am where I want to be. I have done everything in life that I said I would do. I said I would go to college. My middle school counselor said, "Oh no, Lily, you won't be an attorney. You're Negro and you're female. That's not open to you." Cosmetology, nursing, housekeeping. That's what you can do. So go back and rewrite your report. We can't accept this one on being an attorney. And because she was the authority figure and she wouldn't accept my paper, I rewrote it. And I wrote on becoming a cosmetologist. When I graduated high school, I went to beauty college. And guess what? They didn't hire black beauticians in Eugene at that time. And it was an unspoken law that you could not cut black hair in a white barber shop, nor could a black beautician work in a black beauty shop. I graduated high school in 1964 and beauty college in 1965, so we're not talking 100 years ago. I decided to go to beauty college because I couldn't find a job. It wasn't that I wasn't intelligent. I went to Pacific Northwest Bell Telephone Company and took their test, and the HR person who interviewed me said, "You're the only person we ever had that got 100% on the test. But unfortunately, our insurance won't allow us to hire you because you're overweight." Now, today I could have sued her for weightism, but then I couldn't. And it had nothing to do with my weight. They had their quota. They already had 2 black operators at the telephone company. I finally did get to college at the age of 40. Graduated at 45, and here I am, an academic advisor at this institution, kicking that door open for any young woman or any young student of color who wishes to go to college and become an attorney. How can you give me reparation? You can say to young African Americans, if you achieve and if you qualify, we'll give you a college education. That's not asking much. You don't have to bankrupt the economy because you will never pay. You will never be able to pay for all that we contributed to this country. And I wouldn't want that. But it would really please me if not ever again a child hears from an authority figure in a public school, "Oh no, you can't do that because you're African American and you're female." Tuition waivers. We do it every day. Would everybody get to go to college? No, because everybody wouldn't qualify. But if one member of every family made it to this level, do you know how much that accomplishes for everybody in the family? That's my proposal, higher education, the best way to pay us reparation. And I think the only way that America could possibly afford to do it.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me, and I think that's something that people look for. You know, that kind of a system in reparations lawsuits. I'm really new to this area of reparations. I don't know very much. I certainly don't have the historical background. That was just really interesting to listen to. I appreciate that. But I have a legal background, and so I did some research to the other part of the equation here, and did some reading. And what I learned really quickly is there's no way to cram the history and knowledge behind the reparations movement in this country into a 24 to 48-hour period. So, but I did get some kind of information, and kind of took a look at what's going on with reparations, and there are a lot of lawsuits currently. Well, I don't even know if they're current now. A lot of them have been dismissed because of statute of limitations problems. Seems like that's the biggest legal kind of hurdle to reparations lawsuits. And there are a lot of complicated, complex issues kind of embedded in reparations lawsuits that I could see, including, do reparations lawsuits go back to slavery time? There's some people that just want lawsuits that deal with Jim Crow laws and the effects of those because it's more traceable, because both of them touched on two of the really critical pieces to successful lawsuits is identifying a harmed party and being able to just proof or no proof. Usually courts want that harmed party before them. So Jim Crow challenges tend to be more current, and so they are maybe more alive kinds of lawsuits, whereas the statute of limitations seems to be getting a lot of these lawsuits just all over the place, although a couple of really powerful, I guess, lawyers who you alluded to have certainly made arguments, good arguments for either, for ways around statute of limitations problems with these lawsuits, and they sound compelling to me. Definitely that there are historical precedences for equitable reasons to allow those statutes to be waived. And then there's also the issue, which I thought, and I just was reading this recently, that some defendants have chosen to waive those statute of limitations. But I think what's been interesting to me, these lawsuits are going on, they're suing corporate defendants, trying to find, like there are insurance companies who insured the lives of slaves. Well, I think it was MetLife, I'm not 100% sure, that actually admitted that. Yes. Their policies were found, and they've apologized and have put programs, and I'm not sure that particular suggestion that you said, but other kinds of programs into place to try to remedy having done that. There's also, there were lawsuits against the government, but the government has to agree to be sued, and the government hasn't agreed to be sued. And when it comes to slavery reparations, there's this thing called sovereign immunity, and it's my understanding, and again, I'm not an expert, but a little bit of reading I've done, the government hasn't agreed that this is the kind of lawsuit it'll entertain, for the reasons that Mike alluded to, that probably when and if there's enough political or societal momentum, that might change. And I think that's maybe what we've seen with, some of the that's what happened with the Japanese-American lawsuit, that the government agreed to be sued. And then there are, I'm trying to think, there were like there was a variety of different lawsuits, but what I thought was interesting when I was reading these articles about reparations was really the concept behind, tracking some of the history that you were describing, and why it's so important that these reparations lawsuits go forward. At the same time, we have our political movements, and we have, at least my opinion, all sorts of other kinds of actions. And it's partly for awareness, and it's partly because this society, and this became really apparent to me when I was reading it, there's really no way that our society has addressed this issue of slavery. It just hasn't happened. Nobody is, we all recognize it's wrong, and we've been educated about it, and it sounds horrific, but as a culture, and as a society, it doesn't seem to me, in a systematic way, that we've really taken responsibility in the language of, I guess, the way we speak about repairing harm and doing, fixing things. It doesn't seem like society has taken responsibility. And the civil rights movement, which opened up, which stopped a lot of inequity and opened up pathways and doors, but it wasn't, and recognized that this was wrong, but it never said, we're at fault. And that's a really hard step to take, it seems to me. And then again, this is my sense from having read these articles that I've read, that the differences between the actions that we have taken that to try to make a more, to improve, conditions for Black Americans and for, I'm just trying to think about how reparations lawsuits really fit into the whole picture, and it seems to me that that's the part of it, and I think it is money, it is. I mean, there's something very, very palpable to the American public about money and lawsuits in the courts. I mean, that's really what the courts do, is they make people whole by giving money. That's, whether or not we think it's right. I mean, if you have a lawsuit and you lose a family member in a car accident, or there's not a lot the courts can do. They can give you money, and it's not very healing in some ways, but I think our culture and society has come around to accept that that's one of the ways. I guess it hurts people a little bit to have to give money. It also makes you wake up. And in this case, because there is this opportunity for programs like you suggested and many other kinds of solutions that people are proposing that benefit the greater society, that will, of course, eventually benefit society as a whole, it seems to me that reparations lawsuits have a really valuable function in driving the conversation. Whether or not they're successful, I think there's a lot of discussion in the African American community that it's so politically divisive among the African American community and in our culture that it's actually going to undo any good that it can do. And that would just be a matter of how you view politics. Maybe the political scientists in the audience would have an idea about, if you raise an issue that people don't agree with or that's really controversial, are you going to undo any good that comes from what I think comes from just the notoriety or the public awareness that these lawsuits bring? Because I think, like Mike putting this together, the more there's discussion, the more people get used to these concepts, the more acceptable it becomes, and it creates momentum. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a back and forth, and I think that's what you described from the from the very first reparations claim on forward. But eventually, you get somewhere, and I think it's a patient, long process, and I don't think it's in any way over from what I've read. So, again, kind of incoherent thoughts just from a little bit of reading that I've done, but I think there's a place. One of the things also, if we're going to open the floor for discussion pretty soon, that Mike talked to me the day after I read an article in the Oregonian about, I don't know if anyone else caught this, about this, what was it called? Panhandling for reparations. Did anyone see anything about that? I thought that was interesting. It was an art, I guess it was a public art installation or something, and it's a part of a project, and people in Portland were panhandling, essentially looked like begging for money, white people, and then they would give the money they got to the next black person that they saw.
Oh, my.
And it was a way to bring awareness. This just happened on October 10th or 11th. It was very soon after we'd seen each other. And I read in some of these readings I'd done that the art project, or I think if they considered it public art, was very controversial. So I thought that was something that a lot of people thought that, first of all, it looked bad because it made it kind of just was too close to begging for money. And the artist said, well, that's exactly what it is at this point, begging for money in some ways. I mean, we've been left with absolutely no alternatives and no options, and that's how bad the plight is. And there were back and forth about whether or not this is a legitimate way to bring awareness to this issue. I thought that would be a good thing to talk about because it seemed kind of interesting and innovative to me, but then I started reading some of the critiques and it made me wonder about it. So that's all I have to say. And again, I read a great article, and I just want to put this out there, and I bet it's on the librarian's list, but it was fabulous, and it's called Repairing the Past, New Efforts in the Reparations Debate in America by a guy named Charles Ogletree, who is just a brilliant guy. He cites Derek Bell, who used to be a dean here at the U of O Law School, and I think it's, all in all, if you want just a good view of this universe, it's really helpful.
Before we open up for a couple of questions, a couple of quotes that I want to read from this article that I think we put some things into light. I spoke earlier, there was 5 areas that I think need to be discussed on different levels within the areas of reparation: historical, social, economic, legal, political, and psychological. Under the historical aspect of it, Lyndon Johnson said this in 1965. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say you're free to compete with all others, and still justly believe that you are being completely fair. It is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All of our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates. Under the consequence or psychological, this was a quote by Derek Bell, and he actually not Derek Bell, excuse me. Oh yes, it was Derek Bell. In his review, Dissections of a Dream, he says race reparations are more a visual than a legal possibility. Even if Professor Bittker, it was a critique of Professor Bicker's book, has devised a foolproof legal theory for black reparations litigations, few judges or legislators would be moved in the absence of some dramatic event, major crisis, or tragic circumstance that convey the necessity or at least the clear advantages of adopting a reparation scheme. Legal analysis cannot give life to a process that must evolve from the perception of those responsible for perpetuating of racism in this country. And the reason why I wrote that is because I believe that significant event would have to be an apology. I don't think that there is, or at least the discussions about an apology, because without an apology or without the admission of something was wrong, then the event never really happened. Then the last one, an individual named, as soon as I get his name here, Adolph Reed, and he was like a social critic, and he argued that the idea of reparations has 3 relevant dimensions: material, symbolic, and psychological. He agreed that the economic wrongs inflicted on the American black population by slavery and legal segregation manifestly deserve to be remedied. So he's basically saying there needs to be some sort of financial, some sort of financial restitution. He also understood the symbolic dimensions of reparations, the yearning of public acknowledgement of the injustices of the past. But this, he asserts, does not require the rhetoric of reparations, and it fit what he called the Clintonoid tenor of sappy public apologies and maudlin psychobabble about collective pains and healing. You can see what he thought about that. But Reed was most critical of the arguments of reparation activities in regards to a 3rd psychological dimension. In particular, he rejected their assumption that it consciousness that the legacy of slavery is supposed to have distorted or destroyed. He refers to this notion as damage thesis, which maintains that blacks have been psychologically disturbed by their experiences of oppression. This approach to understanding the plight of blacks, he argues, enscones a particular guiding role for upper-class blacks who think that they have escaped the psychological damage that they diagnosed among others. Basically, he's saying that blacks that are in the upper class feel guilty because they've made it and other blacks haven't, and that reparations aren't needed. So you kind of see that even within the black culture, it goes back and forth. So I just wanted to read those to kind of give there's a couple of corrections I wanted to make when I talked about at the beginning with the intro. The president, it wasn't president, in early 1865, General William Sherman announced a plan to make available for settlers by free blacks the South Islands, a portion of lowland south of Charleston, South Carolina. So it was actually an Army general. And then President Andrew Jackson rescinded that plan, forgiving Confederate owners and restoring them to their land. So I just wanted to make that correction too. So with that, we've kind of been going for about an hour now. So does anybody have any questions or comments about what we talked about?
Would that be from the government? Then the government would then fund that higher education, or where do you see the reparations coming from?
And you haven't really thought that far ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Here at the university, we have scholarships that are tuition waivers.
Mm-hmm.
Have no money attached. It just says, we're not going to charge you tuition. And there's a lot of students across the board
Mm-hmm.
who carry those scholarships. Though I don't think that individual universities should be the only institutions responsible for reparation, because the effects of slavery and the social system that we are still now involved with
Mm-hmm.
evolves from the institutionalization of racism.
Mm-hmm.
Access has literally been cut off for millions of African Americans permanently. They are a permanent unemployed segment of this country
Mm-hmm.
because of lack of access to training or education and jobs. And so they sit, some very talented and very gifted, a lot of them in prisons
Mm-hmm.
because of the unjust justice system we have here, with no hope. So where does the education come from? It has to be generated within the culture that has the power
Mm-hmm.
and the money. And let me ask you a question. We are embroiled in racism even in 2007. We thought Jim Crow was dead. He's alive and well, even in 2007. And I'll postulate this to you because you got the microphone, but I welcome response from any
not all there is to it. So if you look at simply the money side of it, is the money going to heal? I think Hilary raised a really good point. We've been taught that money is great, but does that solve some of the other problems relating to the lack of access and opportunity? Probably only minimally.
But is money the only way we can have reparation? You
That I
see,
don't know.
because for me, if you were going to create a monetary reparation, it should have been done when Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, because they were the ones who did the labor and spilled the blood to build this country. You don't have enough money in this country or anywhere else to pay me for all that I lost because of slavery. And I'm not talking about lack of access. I lost human beings who belonged to me because they were torn away from each other and sold hither and thither. I lost a grandfather to lynching. I lost even the connection of having a grandfather because the men on the plantation thought they had the right to my mother's mother and grandmother and great-grandmother's bodies. I lost, and you can't repay that with money. I don't know if you can repay it with anything. And you know, probably the simplest way to repay it was, or is to say I'm sorry and mean it. Now, that doesn't cost a penny, but it'll never happen. I think this country would rather go economically under before they will allow someone in a position and power to say, we're sorry, because this country does not want to live with the fact that they allowed this atrocity to happen, knowing that it was wrong and couldn't be justified. It's, and I don't want to change the subject, but to dramatize it, it's like this country yelling Holocaust when we knew what Hitler was doing, and we waited before we went in to do anything. This country is not in this world. Maybe if God creates it again, but it's not going to say anything was wrong. It was justified. We justified it by the Bible. The Bible said we could do this. When I heard Jerry Falwell, when they were eulogizing him and saying that he preached in a segregated church in the South, and he only integrated his church after the Civil Rights Movement because God told him it was wrong. God called him to preach. He told him it was wrong to start with. And if he went into the church separating God's people, then he had no business in there trying to tell people how to live just lives. And that's, I tell you, I'm opinionated. And those are all atrocities that were allowed to breed in America because of the epoch of time when Africans was brought to this country a slave. And I see the hand over here, and I want to give you a chance to speak.
I think that, and I've just been thinking about this a little bit, and I'm not an expert. But I think, like, if people just started apologizing and meaning it, then I think that's a really strong force. And I was also thinking that, like, economically, you don't have to write a check to every single person and make them prove it. But I think increased access to loans that have, like, more favorable rates and increased access to land. And my high school went and did a Habitat for Humanity trip to Jonestown, Mississippi, and that was a town where there was no economic activity, because when the government said integrate, all the white people left. And so I think finding those places and saying there's gonna be industry here, there's gonna be life in your economy, we're gonna help you and help your children and help your children's children. I think that would be powerful.
One thing that when Lyllye and I was talking, actually, when I called her and said, hey, would you be interested, and then we met, one thing that Lyllye talked about was as a black man, or a typical black man, I automatically get my credit lowered just because I'm a black man. And one of the So, I mean, if you ask me about do I believe that there needs to be reparations, I go back and forth. And not that I'm wishy-washy. It's because if I look at myself and I look at my life, do I deserve reparations or anybody? I don't know. I can't trace my family history back like Lyllye can. I don't know if there's anybody in my family that has been a slave. So for me, do I think that I deserve reparations? I don't think so. I think I've been very blessed to live in this country, and that I have been given opportunities through this country that I might not be able to have gotten in other countries. But I think as a whole, do I think that reparations needs to happen? I would say yes, because this country was built on slavery, the early parts of it. And through the course of the history of this country, and when you look at the way that this country has used other cultures and other societies to build upon it, and those cultures have been compensated, for lack of better terms, then I would say yes, because we haven't been compensated. And like, it doesn't have to be a cash thing. I don't think money is going to solve the issue, because I mean, I'll be honest. If I got a $25,000 check in the mail or something, I don't know if I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to go out and buy a Dodge Charger. Okay, I'm be honest. And it's not going to better my life, except I can tool around Eugene in a black leather trim Dodge Charger.
What you would do is add to the white economy of Eugene, because you'd spend your money in this city that is predominantly white. And so I think if America stopped to think like that, they say give them the money. It will only spark the economy. And don't think I'm being bitter. I'm trying to be sarcastic, but it's true. So when you say if you give them money, they'll just go spend it wildly. Well, if you've been poor all your life and somebody give you a little spending cash, you're going to spend it. If you haven't been able to eat a steak, you want to know what it tastes like. If you've never tasted lobster, you want to try a little bit of lobster to see what it tastes like. Do I think I deserve reparation? I've done very well. I've done everything in life I wanted to do. Do I have a savings account? No, I don't. I raised 2 children by myself, and I'm raising my granddaughter. I entered college at the age of 40, and I graduated at 45. I worked 3 years for 5 internists, and I came back to the university as an academic advisor. I've had a wonderful opportunity to touch young lives, to open the door to higher education for several young people, and to watch them graduate. I'm very gratified with who I am and what I accomplished, being Maddie and Sam Reynolds' little girl, my father not graduating from 1st grade and my mother only graduating from 8th grade. This world can't give me anything. I can do it on my own, but there are some who can't do it on their own, who are lost. And if you give them money, they might go buy that Dodge Charger because they've never owned a Chevrolet. Now, you look at people in New Orleans and Katrina, and you know there's poverty in this world, and the poverty don't just look like me. There is poverty in this world, and we are our brother's keepers. And we are so arrogant in our arrogance that we will take what we want, what we don't want, and give it to third world countries and poison their countries and poison their women and poison their babies and exploit their children in sweatshops to make luxuries for us. That's arrogance. And we feel we have that right because of the socialization in America. The countries where people came looking for a better opportunity for Western Europe. And they came and found it at the expense of the people who were already here, and then claimed it for their own, like it belonged to them, and they invented it, and then exploited it, and then when they got through exploiting here, they went to other countries and exploited them too, and most of those countries are brown countries. That some point, you got to pay the piper somewhere. And it may not be through reparation to African descendants of African slaves. It may not be through us. But at some point, we as a people, and I hope you heard the we, because I am American. I was born in Eugene, Oregon 61 years ago. This is my country. And I am just as much responsible for the atrocities that happens out of this country as anybody else. And if you sit back and don't open your mouth and don't use your power to vote, you are just as much a part of the problem. Because you're not doing anything to make it better. We as a people, and I'm going to shut up in just a minute, but I have to say this, young people, because there's an election coming up. We allow ourselves to be brainwashed by a whole lot of smoke screening by some very influential, wealthy people who tell us how to think. And I'll give you this example because I want you to vote. How many of you are 18 and will be voting this year? I want you to vote. But I want you to use critical thinking. Don't go out there and vote because your parents were Republicans or your parents were Democrats or he's handsome or she is beautiful and she's the first woman running and he's the first African American. Make up your own mind about what you think should happen in this country and vote your choice. We have a state election going now and ballots are out. So if you got your state ballot, vote. And look at Major 50 because I'm a smoker. I want you to know that I smoke. And the governor has proposed a cigarette tax to fund a health plan for poor children. And I want you to go back and look at their commercials with these children for this health plan, and this angers me because I smoke and it's my 68 to 86 cents a pack that he wants to tag that comes out of my pocket to pay for this insurance. And don't get me wrong, I have no problems with children having health insurance, but that's the state's responsibility, not mine. But you look at those advertisements and tell me, how many brown faces do you see in those advertisements? Because I haven't seen one. And that reflects the state. They're not looking for my vote, they're looking for yours. They're appealing to you by putting white children up there who has no insurance because they're too poor and they're sick, and let the smokers pay for them. I was appalled, and I still am appalled. And even if I didn't smoke, I would vote against it because that is the covert way that we live with what we live with in Oregon in 2007. I'm going to shut up, and young man, you have something to say.
Going back to what you were saying about how the Jim Crow laws are very much still alive, like, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm going to kind of get on my soapbox for a minute. This is all my opinion, but looking, you read what happened, the Gen 6 and everything like that, and it's unacceptable what this country's doing. I think we go abroad to fight a war on terrorism, right? Racism is terrorism.
Yes, it is.
And so I find it really hypocritical that we're going into other countries and we're saying, well, these people are horrible, and yes, the atrocities that happen, they're horrible. But we need to look at our country and what's going on. What happened in Jenna was unacceptable. The classism that sponsors racism is unacceptable. It's appalling, and I couldn't agree with you more when you say you have to speak up and you have to open your mouth because, yes, I'm American. Tracing my family back, they immigrated from Europe and Asia over into the country long after slavery and Jim Crow laws were in place. But, the atrocities that happen today, I feel if I don't take a stance and if I don't say anything, and, I get a lot of flack from people that I stand on my soapbox and, I have opinion about everything. But if you don't speak up and you don't say that stuff, I'm just as guilty as everyone else. And I think that where reparations start, I think it does. It starts with an apology. And I think from there, you need to completely reboot the system. And I think there needs to be massive economic and social changes in the country before you can cut a check. Because exactly what you were saying, you take that check and what do? You reinvest it into the market where those profits are going to go straight to the business owners not the minority workers. So I think where we go, you definitely, I think, need to restart the economy and start rebuilding from there and looking at, you know, regardless of race, skin color, or whatever, there are the lower class which is being oppressed, and I think that it fuels racism and hatred and everything else. So before we go spending our resources, you know, trying to fix other people's countries or anything else like that, I think we need to take a critical look at our country and see our problems and fix ourselves from the inside out.
Actually, he was next. Right here. Right there. Yeah.
I'd like to go to like an analogy of what I think.
No, you're cool.
Go.
No, you're good.
Okay, so like back to cigarettes. I think it was about 20 years ago. I don't know when they started filing lawsuits against the cigarette companies. The people who were like affected and got cancer from cigarettes would sue the cigarette companies, right? Not the stores that they bought cigarettes from, right? So this. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
That's
I'm thinking of how this would set a precedent. This would go back to the tribal leaders in Africa, into the Arab slave traders, and then to where all the slaves were bought, say in China, South America. It's just, I don't know, it's something interesting to think about because it's a really broad, it's just a really huge thing, reparations, you know. Example, like the Civil War, how many people died for it? Say we started to pay people, what would it mean to those families whose great-grandparents died fighting for your rights? It's kind of, I don't know, it's tough because it's sort of, you have to pay somehow. You could say we've already paid. I guess in conclusion, I'd like to say, like, you have to differentiate affirmative action from reparations. It's like very different.
You're right.
And yeah, I would say that we would agree with that. The way that I view reparations, I do not see it as stated before, is cutting this check. Because cutting a check really doesn't do anything. You're just giving money. And it doesn't resolve the fact, I think, that it doesn't address the fact that there was something that happened within this country that really hasn't been addressed. We learned about it. We learned about that there were slaves that happened during that time. We learned that it wasn't a cool thing that happened. We learned that there's been consequences in this country since then. But it hasn't been addressed. It hasn't been addressed like the Japanese internment camps during World War II. It hasn't been addressed like with the Holocaust in World War II. It hasn't been addressed like the plight of the Native Americans. You know, those have been addressed, and whether they have been rectified or not, those situations have been addressed by this country. Slavery is still one that hasn't been addressed yet. We learn about it, and everybody knows about it, but I don't believe it's been addressed. So I think you bring up a very good point. I mean, that you do have to go back. But I just don't believe it's been addressed. Sorry, you was next, and then the individual sitting next to you.
Okay, I know you're kind of talking about a verbal response to this a form of kind of reparation, but we're also kind of focusing on socioeconomic response. And I was wondering, kind of going off of what he said, how do you think affirmative action fits into that whole picture of a socioeconomic response?
Can I ask you, who do you think benefited most from affirmative action?
Like, just a single group of people?
Mm-hmm.
You really want me to answer?
I do.
Okay. I guess I would say, like, I guess I would say any minority group.
Okay. Anybody know the answer to the question?
Latinos.
They benefited the least.
Or like whites.
White females. They were minorities. They were able to come out of their homes, stop taking care of their husbands, and go into the workforce and get family wages. And when it came to affirmative action, it was much easier to hire the white woman over the black male, or the black woman, or the Asian woman, or the Asian man. She satisfied affirmative action. So how do I compare it to reparation? I don't. Is affirmative action a good law? Yes. I believe in affirmative action. I don't think that I would be where I am today had it not been for affirmative action.
And do you think that affirmative action then should have been structured differently so that white females could have?
I'm also a feminist. No, no, because I think we have a right as women to be the best that we can be, and I don't think we should be restricted from being anything we're qualified to be just because of our gender. No. I think that affirmative action was put in place to help those who had been denied access. It was just an added bonus for the power structure that they could put white women in front, so that if they wanted to hire a minority, they didn't have to hire a minority of color, but they could still fill their quota and keep their government contracts. I want to congratulate you, and I want to honor you for having the courage to say what you said. And I can understand why you said I'm nervous. But I really honor you for sharing what was in your heart. And I can hear what you're saying, because a lot of times when we start talking about slavery, they will say, but tribal chiefs gathered up slaves in Africa to sell them to the slavers who came to buy the people. And that's true. That's a part of history. It's written, and we've read it. It is a part of history. I'm not going to take you all the way back to the plantation. But what I want you to be aware of, and I really like dialoguing with you because you're not afraid to say what you think, is because of that history in America, we had to have affirmative action. It wasn't something that we did because it was a great thing. It came out of the civil rights movement. It came out of civil disobedience because this country realized we have to do something. These people aren't taking it anymore. And so they came up with affirmative action. And though they postulated a good plan, they also put a mechanism in place to preserve what was already here. So did it help? Yes, it helped a lot. But was it the be-all and end-all? No, it wasn't. It's not about what happened in the 1800s. And it's really not about the Jim Crow. It is the social stigma that still is placed on any African American in this country today. And you don't have to be a descendant of slaves. You don't have to have come from that place. If your skin is black, there is a stigma that you carry here in America. Does anybody disagree with that?
I was going to say I agree.
All right. And that's what I'm talking about. Only because of my skin color am I thought to be less than. And I really think I'm an intelligent human being. I'm not the sharpest tack in the box. But I can punch a hole in the wall. But there are those who think that because I'm brown, I don't even know what a tack is. That I can't, not because I'm not skilled, but I can't because I'm brown. Can you understand what I'm saying? That came out of slavery. That mentality came out of my history in this country. And just like you say, but I'm not responsible. I didn't do it. I'm not responsible either. I've never picked one bulb of cotton. Never hoed one cotton field. But I do have African American characteristics and brown skin and nappy hair. And that makes me a descendant of a slave slave, and that puts a stigma on me as an American citizen. That's what I'm talking against right now. If we had leveled the playing field, if Abe Lincoln said in his proclamation they are free and equal, and America said, okay, come on, we're all on the same playing field, and we all have the same rights, it'd be a different story. We wouldn't be talking about this today, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen then, and it's not happening now. But I still want to commend you. I'd love to have a conversation with you because you're real, and I appreciate that. That's how you learn. You say what's in your heart. It may not be the popular thing to say, but how can we postulate theories and change opinions if we don't know what you're thinking? I'm sorry, Mike, there's a young lady with a mic that want to say something.
I just wanted to say that also, I think that it would have been meant a lot more if, reparations, apologies, things that happened more during the actual time that slavery was occurring or after it occurred, or even to, your parents, for instance, who experienced more firsthand, even though themselves were not slaves. But do you think it still would carry a similar weight if some, big politician got up there and was like, I'm sorry for slavery? Because to me, that doesn't sound genuine. Just because they haven't gone through it, I haven't gone through it. Pretty much everyone who's alive these days isn't directly, firsthand involved. I was just thinking, would it mean maybe more to not only apologize for slavery, but to apologize for all of the things that had to be done, like civil rights and things, because that shouldn't have been necessary. We should have just been able to be equal. And my mother herself grew up during the integration, actually in southern Louisiana, is where we're all from. And do you think it needs something more if it was more done through action and more for recent events as well as past events?
Can I just say this? And Mike, I'm sorry. My son is sitting out there, and I bet you say my mom has lost her mind. But I want to share with I'm a storyteller, so I'll share this story. I'm a reader, too. And I've really been into Southern novels. And I read a story about a woman who was from Georgia, and her parents bred dogs, and their barn caught a fire, and her parents died in the fire. And fast forward, now she's married, and she has 3 children of her own, and they've traveled the world because her husband was a military man, and they got divorced, and she came home, and she went up into her attic, and she found all these old trunks, and in one trunks were journals that her ancestors had kept that said to her they were slaveholders. And so all of this money that was held in trust for her, she felt they had made because they were slaveholders. And she decided she couldn't spend that money, and it was millions. And she couldn't spend that money, so they kept very good records of their slaves, and she went through the records, and she started looking for these people. And she realized how families had been torn apart. But one family that her parents had owned marked their children by cutting a cross in the bottom of their foot so it would scar, and leave the scar so that they could recognize each other if they happened to meet in their life's passages. And she found as many of these people as she could, and she said, what can I do for you? And one woman said, I have cataracts, I need eye surgery. And one woman said, I need a refrigerator, and my son needs an 18-wheeler because he drives trucks, but he can't make no money because he don't own his own truck. And she began to find these people and bring these people. She found the people with the crosses on the bottom of their foot. And it was the first time they had come together as a family because they were sold all across the country. And in the end, she said to them, and I will educate your children. And I thought, you see, we never stopped to think that some of that money that came from the slave trade still circulating in this country today. R.J. Reynolds is rich. The tobacco company, very rich from slavery. What would happen if he said, let me go and find the ancestors of my slaves and just say, I'm sorry. It doesn't have to come from a big politician. If George Phillips' family in Shreveport, Louisiana, called my family today and said, we're sorry that's my mother's father's name, it would mean a lot. It would mean a lot. To even acknowledge the fact that we were connected, it would mean a lot. Politicians are good at lying, and they're good at lying well. I don't know if I believe a politician. I'm sorry. I don't know if I believe a lawyer.
Can I segue in there?
Wait, and 1 minute. And knowing Jerry Falwell, I don't know how many ministers I would trust. I want you to know. But I would trust a descendant of a slaveholder who came to me and said, your family worked our plantation. And I want you to know I'm sorry. You would not have to give me 1 penny if we could sit down and share a meal together and talk about what it's like being descendants of the slave master and the slave. That, I think, would heal a lot of scars. And I'm really sorry. I hate to run out. I do love to talk, but I do have responsibilities. And I do have a son sitting out there saying my mom's going crazy and I need to go home. So I've really enjoyed myself. And I'm in 164 Oregon Hall. If you want to continue this discussion, I'd be glad to entertain you in my office. And I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Mike. I hate running out on you. But I'm taking my umbrella, and I'm taking my water, and I'm going home. And I'm taking my jacket. I have to tell my story before I leave.
All right.
Because I think it's important. This weekend we celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the death of Dr. Rob Profit, who was an outstanding member of the Academy here at the University of Oregon. Rob died October 2006. In July of 2006, I was walking into Oregon Hall to my office, and he was walking out of Oregon Hall, and he gave me a big hug, and I thought, what's wrong with Rob? We don't have this kind of relationship, but this was truly a warm and a genuine hug. And he just walked away. And a couple of weeks later, he called me and he said, are you going to be in your office? And I said, yes. He said, I have something for you. I'll be over at 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, Rob walked in my office with this red felt covering this large and kind of clumsy object. And he said, sit down, I have to tell you a story first. In 1850, there was an African slave who married a native man in Shreveport, Louisiana. And they had a daughter. And they walked into Oklahoma to his tribe to see if they could take refuge. And his tribe wouldn't receive them because she was an African slave. But they told him to go to upstate New York, and there was a tribe there who might take them in. And so they traveled to upstate New York. And it was Rob's tribe. And they did take them in, and she became a sister to the tribe. And she presented the tribe with this carved platter, which had been carved from a live tree. And it had a base on it, but it was all one piece. And it's probably 3 feet long, and maybe 18 inches wide, and maybe 6 inches deep. And she said to the tribe as she presented it to the matriarch of the tribe, one day this platter will return where it belongs. And it will be returned by somebody from your tribe. But the person who returns this platter will have died and come back to life. A few years ago, Rob Proudfoot had 2 massive heart attacks and died. And through cutting-edge techniques, they brought him back to life. And he said, when I walked out of Oregon Hall that day, Spirit told me to hug you. And when I hugged you, I knew this tray belonged to you. And he presented me with the platter. And as he placed it in my hands, I felt the warmth go from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. And I thought, this could have been my great-great-grandma. And I opened it, and it's old, and it's chipped, and it's wood, and it's not treated, but it is beautiful to me. And I took it to my mom, and I put it in her lap, and I told her the story, and tears flowed from my mother's eyes, and she said, you know, Lily, this could have been my great-grandma's sister. I want to say to you, we live in a world that goes around in cycles. And you never know who's going to cycle their way into your life. 3 months before Rob Proudfoot left this earth, he presented me with that platter. Spirit, recognize spirit. I recognize spirit in this room. Keep your heart. Keep your passions. The world is yours to make or to destroy. You are here at our institution of higher education to be enlightened. Don't leave here with your light no brighter than it was when you got here. Don't leave here without stepping outside of your comfort zone. Don't leave here not knowing that this world in which you will spend the rest of your life does not look like you. Doesn't look just like me. In the next 50 years, it may not look like anything you've ever seen because the demographics are changing, but prepare yourself. Prepare yourself by learning how to think for yourself and to think critically. And with those words, I'm going home. And have a good evening.
So with that, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful evening. Thank you for your comments. Kevin Hatfield, do you have bibliography? I can't say the word. Thank you.
If anybody wants to sign up for a follow-up discussion, see me and Mike after.
Yes. So, but thank you for your time.